Welcome.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to say congratulations, because we've had an amazing week, right? And it's Friday, and you're all still here. So I first want to give a round of applause to all of you and say congratulations on becoming better leaders here. Yes, nicely done. Excellent. So how many of you, why don't you raise your hand if you feel like you have gotten some good advice this week? You gotten some good advice this week? Excellent. Sam, please look around the room. You've done your job. Look at all this good advice that people have gotten. All right, so what I want to talk today about is how to take all of this good advice that you've gotten this week and explore more good advice out there without falling into those pitfalls of finding some of the bad stuff. So what I study is what works and what doesn't in advice. I have always been interested in advice. And in graduate school, I got interested in self-help. So I want to begin with the idea of what is self-help. Well, when I first started being interested in the advice industry, I didn't really kind of know. I knew that self-help books were about helping people become better versions of themselves, right? That it was that these were books to help you with some behavior change to be a better you. But I didn't quite know what the market was like. So since I was in graduate school and I had a fairly flexible schedule, one day I found a really comfy chair in the local Barnes & Nobles, and I sat down in view of the self-help section. And I was a little bit voyeuristic. It was sort of weird, I guess, but I just sat and watched what people did in the self-help aisle. So the first thing I saw was a young woman who came in and went straight to the relationship self-help section. And she pulled off 5 or 10 books. And then she plopped down right in the middle of the relationship self-help aisle and started reading these books, and burst into tears. That was kind of interesting to watch. Then I saw a man come in. And he looked left, and he looked right, and he looked around. And he went to the section on how to be a better lover, how to have better sex. He grabs the book off the shelf. He's looking around and making sure nobody sees him. And then he goes running over to the business self-help aisle to flip through the book without anyone knowing what he's really reading. So as I was watching these people interact with the advice industry, I realized, first, that people really want help. They really want advice. But there are some ideas about what good advice is, what's appropriate advice, and how we should consume it. So when it comes to leadership self-help, what does that really mean? So first of all, leadership self-help, business self-help, has to be nonfiction. So it's not made up, or at least we hope it isn't. It's advice for how to actually change your behavior, not just stuff about how to make yourself feel better, right? So it's not just about changing your attitude, it's about changing your behavior and doing something different. One of the really interesting things about all self-help is that it creates a common language. It creates a vocabulary so that when you read the book, you're able to talk about your problems in a new way. And better yet, if all of your friends and colleagues are reading the book, then together you have a new common shared language to talk about your challenges. When we think about self-help, we're really thinking about self-control, because self-help books are about training yourself to do better, to be better. And one of the core fundamental tenets of the self-help industry is that self-help and that self-control is a skill. That self-control is something that you can learn to be a better leader. And we all believe that because we are here today. Right? But one of the downsides of a lot of business self-help is that it focuses on the individual. And one of the great things about what we're going to be doing today is focusing on becoming a leader, not as an individual, me, but as a we, as a community, as a team. And most self-help out there, unfortunately, doesn't do that. It focuses on me, the individual, rather than the group. And that's a downside of it. Another really interesting thing about the self-help industry is that nobody studies it. It is an $11 billion industry, and amazingly enough, I am one of very few academics who take it seriously. By the way, this is a wonderful marketing opportunity for anybody who wants to sort of study this industry, because very few people do. It's also an industry that is growing fast. Self-help books have more than doubled as a percentage of all book titles since the 70s. So there are many more books out there, yes, but the percentage of them that are self-help books just keeps growing. When you ask people what the most influential books in their lives have been, many people list self-help books as among the most influential and most transformative books. And amazingly enough, buying one self-help book doesn't mean that you're going to never buy a self-help book again. It actually means that you value advice and that you're much more likely to buy yet another book. So 80% of folks who buy self-help go buy another one. Therapists recommend self-help books. Coaches recommend self-help books. And yet, as consumers, we are not really taught how to be critical about the advice we receive. So that's one of the things I really want to do today. When we think about being critical about self-help, the first thing we need to ask is who's reading it. Now, there's this kind of stigma with self-help that only losers need advice, right? So when some of you may think about who the typical self-help reader is, you think of like the unemployed dude passed out on the couch, right? This is not who reads self-help. Folks who read self-help tend to be more successful, more educated, and more affluent than average. It's not just women who read self-help, it's both men and women. It's not just men who read leadership self-help books, it's men and women. It's not just women who read dieting and relationship self-help, men do that too. And when we think about the type of person who reads self-help, these are the achievers, the innovators, the thinkers. So it is actually a much cooler club to be in than most people give it credit for. Why? Well, because if you value things like self-control, then you want more of it. If you have success in your career, you want more of it. So one thing to sort of shatter this myth up front is that if you are here in this room and you are on the journey to becoming a great leader, then the best of self-help is actually for you. Now, when we think about good self-help versus bad self-help versus mediocre self-help, I thought of the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. The way the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears goes is that there is this girl who finds porridge, and some porridge is too hot, some porridge is too cold, and some porridge is just right. And similarly, with self-help, some self-help is too extreme. It's too hot. Some self-help is really a kind of generic platitude. It makes you feel good, but actually doesn't help you on your path to leadership. And then there's the self-help that is just right. And so today I want to tell you a little bit about what to avoid in both of the extremes, and then spend some time helping you with practices to get the most out of that sweet spot, that Goldilocks zone of just right, useful leadership self-help. So we can start with the extreme. There are plenty of self-help books out there that make big promises but don't deliver. And the way they make those promises is by repeating them over and over and over again. You will be successful if you follow my advice. Did I mention that you will be successful if you follow my advice? This is not the same as proof. But the way our minds work, when things get repeated over and over again, yeah, we tend to believe them. The extreme self-help is really kind of sinister because it takes academic research and kernels of very good ideas and then distorts it, and then either oversimplifies it or twists it to work with this particular guru's self-help program, but actually makes the advice inaccurate and sometimes downright dangerous. Lots of promises of instant gratification in some of the bad self-help. And I just put some of my least favorite up here on the, these are the ones that I'm throwing under the bus. You may know stories about some of them. You may have heard about some of them. In fact, and I won't have a show of hands, many of you may have actually read some of them because they are among some of the most popular self-help books out there. When we think about advice and these books, we kind of think, oh, well, it couldn't be that bad. It couldn't be that extreme, right? Well, there are self-help seminars that go along with a lot of these. And James Arthur Ray, who wrote Harmonic Wealth, went on to do a spiritual warrior seminar in 2009, where he put more than 50 people in a sweat lodge, stood outside the sweat lodge and told people, if you don't stay in this very, very hot, very dark, oppressive space for several hours, you will not only fail in this life, but you will fail in the afterlife. And 3 people died, and more than a dozen others were seriously injured and hospitalized. When we think about extreme self-help, we tend to think, oh, well, that would never happen to me. I would never be so stupid as to end up in that sort of situation. But extreme self-help is attractive to us because it makes these huge promises, because we think we can go to the extreme. We get excited. We think it's possible. And then we take it just a little bit too far and get into trouble. At the other end of the spectrum, there's the self-help that isn't so bad, really, but it also doesn't really help you. So there are all sorts of cute books, like Chicken Soup for the Entrepreneur's Soul. You know, it has some sweet quotes in it, but it's not going to really transform your life. The sort of generic self-help tells a lot of stories of transformation. But spoiler alert, most of these stories are not true. They're called magnified moments, where I would take a little bit of your story and then a little bit of your story, and I would put them together to make the perfect story of how successful someone would be if they followed my advice. The problem with that, of course, is that this isn't real life, and makes everybody who read the advice think that they're failures because they're not getting the success that these made-up stories are promising. There is lots of circular logic in some of these books, and worse yet, they are solipsistic, which, by the way, is one of my favorite words. I teach it to all of my students And if you don't know what it means, I'm going to teach it to you because it's a fabulous put down if you want to say something mean to somebody. Solipsism is about being really self-absorbed and making everything about me, me, me. And too much of the advice out there is really me-focused, right? It's all about looking inside yourself rather than engaging as a team or in a community. So if you want to say something mean to somebody, you just say, oh, you are so solipsistic. And most of the time, they won't really know what you mean, but they'll know that it's not good. So that's what doesn't work. But let's talk about what does work, because what I want you to leave here today with are 3 practices for purposeful leadership advice, for how to be good consumers of leadership advice. Because you already are consumers of leadership advice. And what's wonderful about this organization is that you have been given only the best, only the most tested and well-researched advice. But as you go out there into the wide world of leadership advice, my hope is that these practices and the questions that I am going to share with you are going to help along the way. I'm going to be sharing these slides, by the way, on your GILD app. So you can hopefully hold on to some of these questions and use them to be critical consumers going forward. And speaking of questions, I am going to hopefully make this a little bit interactive. So if you have questions as I am talking about this, you can share them online, and we're going to have mic runners who are going to do a little bit of Q&A about this. So the first practice is a challenge for you to be a conscious consumer of self-help, a conscious consumer of advice by asking questions. Now, that seems like a really simple thing, but most people don't. The way that we purchase advice books is somebody says, oh, I read this book, it's great, it totally changed my life. You should buy it. And so you go and buy it. That's it. The dirty little secret is that when people say that, they probably didn't get past chapter 3 of the book. They put it back on their shelf, and now they're recommending it to you. So how do you ask the right questions? How do you be a conscious consumer? Well, I'm going to put up a bunch of questions on the screen now that come from a man named Dr. Gerald Rosen, and he was the chair of the American Psychological Association about 25 years ago. And what he was concerned about was that more and more people were reading self-help, but nobody was sort of figuring out whether it was tested, whether it actually worked. And so he created a list and a standard that folks who are psychologists and psychiatrists writing self-help need to stick to. He created a sort of code of conduct for these writers. It didn't catch on. But these questions are wonderful for you as consumers, because these are the ones that you can ask yourself as you're looking at any advice to make sure that you're on the right path. So, has this program been evaluated in any way? The vast majority of advice out there has not been tested for efficacy. So ask that question. If you take the advice in the book, can you also take other people's advice? Or do you have to follow only this particular guru's advice? Some of the worst self-help tells you that you can't talk to your colleagues or your family about the advice because they just wouldn't understand. Don't do that. Talk to everybody about the advice that you get and see whether it passes the smell test. Do people say, yeah, that's a good idea? When you bring it to your teams, are they excited about it as well? Is there data? So many of the bits of data when you say that something has been proven. An exercise may have been proven in a clinical setting, but just because it works in a lab doesn't mean that it is going to work in everyday life for you. Is the problem that you are addressing actually the problem that you have? We like to think that we know what we need to change in our lives, but we are terrible judges of what we need, what we want. And self-help can help as long as we are asking the right question and trying to solve the right problem. But the point that I feel is very useful to the idea of becoming and social change is, are these issues, are there structural and social issues that you need to address? Is it just about me, or can you come together as a team to make things better? So once you've been a conscious consumer and asked the right questions, I think then you need to ask, what are you really trying to do as you consume advice? So the three questions that I think everybody needs to ask are, what matters most to me? Why does it matter? And then how can I make it happen? The what matters most to me and why does it matter really is a reflection on your strengths and on your values, on what kind of impact you want to have in the world. And this is the work that Richard Leiter has done so brilliantly and talked to you about at the beginning of the week, and we'll talk to you about more today. Is the advice that you are getting addressing what actually matters to you? Or is it what matters to somebody else? So much of the time we think in terms of shoulds, not values. I should do this. I should change this about myself. Rather than, is this a value that I really have? Is this a change that should be solved on my own or solved in a group? Most changes are better done in public commitments when you are working together as a team. And for those of you who are new to the realm of behavioral economics, I want to teach you another, so now we have solipsism as like a good nerdy word. Now I want to teach you another really good nerdy concept, and it is the concept of hyperbolic discounting. It sounds very complicated. It isn't. Here's how it works. Let's see, I think somebody asks me to do something for November, and I say, yep, my November is totally free. I would love to. And then my November comes around, and I realize that I have agreed to 19 things, all of which fall in the same period. How did that happen? Well, I engaged in what behavioral economics folks call hyperbolic discounting. And it is the idea that when things are close to us, we see them better and we want them more. And when things are far away from us, we think, nah, it probably doesn't matter. So, for example, if I offered you a little bit of money now, you would be excited, right? If I just start giving out money now, you're excited. But if I say, 10 years from now, if you come back here, I'm going to give you a lot more money, well, that would be better. But that's very far away. Most of you are going to take a little bit of money right now. If I say, you can eat this cupcake now, or you can look awesome in a bathing suit later, that cupcake is right in front of you. You know it's going to taste good. And so you want to do the thing that is easier and closer to you now. We all do it. We discount the future. And when it comes to advice, we love quick fix advice. We love what we can do right now that we think is going to make a huge change. Sometimes it will, but more often, becoming great at whatever you do takes time, effort, and dedication. And going for that bigger reward down the line and not being distracted with the bright, shiny object right in front of you now. practice is about taking any advice that you receive and making it your own. Going from thinking about change to actually doing it. So I want to suggest that there are some really core, purpose-based leadership commitments that we all want to engage in. The first one is the importance of saying no before saying yes. Here's the example. Let's say that you want to start going to the gym. You want to start being more healthy and exercising more, all right? So let's say you want to do a 1-hour class at the gym, and it probably takes 15 minutes to get there, maybe 15 minutes to get back. You'll have to shower, and that's probably all in maybe 2 hours, all right? But you want to do this 3 times a week, right? Because you're committed to getting fit. All right, so then we are looking at 6 hours out of your week. What 6 hours are you going to take out of your existing schedule to make going to the gym happen? All of a sudden, it looks a whole lot less attractive to go to the gym, huh? Because you're thinking to yourself, where am I going to find 6 hours? I'm a very busy person already. This is a huge pitfall in actually acting on any advice. We believe we can just add new things to our schedule, but we can't. If you are going to say yes to a new commitment, you need to say no first to something else. As we learned yesterday, I think it was, no is a complete sentence. Saying no before saying yes opens you up to all sorts of good possibilities for behavior change. And it's essential. And by the way, it's something that very few of us actually do. So, did any of you make New Year's resolutions? Raise your hand if you made New Year's resolutions for change. Oh, only a couple of you? Really? Really? Only a couple of you made New Year's resolutions? I think you're all too cynical on New Year's resolutions already, huh? Yeah. So here's the thing with New Year's resolutions. We think that we're going to be able to make all these awesome changes in our life, right? And a typical New Year's resolution list for me back in the day was I was going to do all sorts of things. I was going to get in shape. I was going to eat better. I was going to spend more time with my kids. I'm going to do all these awesome things, right? They're great. These are all good ideas. But guess what? You end up failing at all of them because you can't change everything at once. So the next sort of big advice about taking advice is to pick one bit of advice, pick one bit of behavior change that you want to engage in. Pick one. It's really hard. It doesn't mean that you can't have more later. It doesn't mean that you can't continue to improve yourself. But pick one thing that you are going to do and really commit to it. As I said, the dirty secret about self-help books is that most people actually don't read the whole book. In fact, most people really read the first couple chapters or skim it or don't even read it at all. We buy these books and we get a boost of self-efficacy. We buy a book and we say, I have made a commitment to change. I spent money on this. I think it's a great idea. I have it in my house. That does not mean that you have made a change. But it is a first step. You feel good about yourself. Then maybe you read the first couple chapters. The book seems great, but you generally get the gist of it, right? And then you put it down and you say, I'm absolutely going to get back to this later. And then you don't. But what you do is recommend it to many other people who also do the same thing. Now, We know this because academics have done some interviews on how people read self-help. We also know this because more and more advice is